Recording in progress. Hello. Okay. And we should get people. I guess I'm still a little bit early. Yep. All right. We got people streaming in right on time. Let's go. All right. And then we come over to the community tab. Um, also, the webinar is starting. All right. Let's see. Oh, right. I need to make sure that everyone can chat. Everyone can chat with everyone. Hello. Where is everyone coming from? Euler? We're still about 5 minutes early. We got Houston, Poland. Happy Friday evening, Poland. I hope there are no Russian missiles flying overhead. New Delhi. Oh, wow. It must be late over in India. What time is it? I think we're about what, like 9 hours difference? Well, thanks for staying up late. I hope you get some sleep after this. Enjoy the weekend. And so for anyone that's new, Jennifer or Luca Neifer from Germany. Sorry, my brain tried to say all of those words at once. But yeah, so for folks that are new, the way that this works is I've got a short presentation, just like my typical slide deck thing, and then we'll switch to the Q&A format. I've got a whole like tutorial in the presentation just so that everyone is kind of on the same page. But everyone is of course welcome to chat in the chat while I'm talking or while answering questions. Yeah, and usually we get started about 5 minutes after just because people are streaming in. But it seems like people are streaming in a little faster than normal, which is not surprising because I opened it up to YouTube and Patreon and Substack. So yeah, so everyone is aggregating here. Do, 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 do. That was a good question. I'll go ahead and answer that. I went to the gym yesterday because I wasn't feeling good. I had like bad dreams, and then there was something like not really like confrontation, just a mild disappointing conversation. So I was like, oh, I need to work it out. So yesterday was gym, but today, I mean, I did go to the gym today, but it was just for breathing and yoga and posture work. Good question, thank you. Actually, here's my. Mhm. Let's see. We got our resident board queen. We got Straylight. We got Dylan. We got Eric, Maureen. Good to see everybody. Baston. I've never been up to Boston. Is it as Irish as the movies make it out to be? Like, is everybody there just Irish or Italian? It's even more. Okay, so they have to downplay it a little bit in the movies. That's great. What kind of I assume you mean martial arts, not marital arts, although I've done both. Um no, I did it's been many years, but I did the two big ones were Hapkido and Taekwondo. And I did a little bit of Thai boxing. It wasn't full on Muay Thai, it was just Thai boxing. But not nearly as much. I never got into striking. I loved grappling and ground fighting. In fact, that was actually one of the first things that like my now wife and I did when we were started hanging out was she's a second degree black belt, but I have 60 pounds on her, so it's not a fair fight. Dublin is as Irish as Boston. Oh, that's a good one. Um, let's see. And then our resident Borg queen, the connection between histamine and food. Yep. Yep. Yeah, so if you have persistent stuffy nose, then you might have histamine intolerance. That's not a diagnosis, just something to look into. Um, yeah. Yeah, Thai boxing and jujitsu. That sounds like a lot of fun. I if I'm ever youthful again, I might get back into it. Like, God, that's the one thing that I really want is like when we have a holodeck. Like I want to be like, give me a level one Taekwondo sparring partner, and then like I want to work up to like just fighting Klingons. My wife says that I have the personality of a Klingon. All right. Kapla! Yeah, exactly. All right, we're at 20 people. It's right on the hour, so we'll wait another few minutes. People usually start streaming in right about now, and then we'll get started. But everyone is welcome to just keep hanging out and chatting in the chat window for now. Let's see, why is the attendees list up? I don't need that. There we go. But yeah, so where's everyone, all the new folks that are streaming in? Where are you coming from? Either physically or digitally. Did you come from Patreon, YouTube, or Substack? That can be a pop quiz question. Or you can just talk about like your hometown. We're trying to figure out which was more Irish. Okay, we got Seattle, Portland, yep, West Coast folks. Philly, Michigan. Hey, Michigan, what's the weather like? Because I know like I dated a girl once for a while who was from Michigan and she would always talk about like lake effect snow. She was a trip. It's 42. Oh yes, colder than it is here. Poland. Yep, had snow. Yeah, there's a YouTuber that I watch who's presently like on the far north, like in Lapland of Finland, and it's just like still like frozen hell. Oh, we got Finland. Yep. Montreal. I want to take my wife to Montreal. I was there in the summer. So this was many, many years ago. We went to Montreal in the summer. I don't even know why. I think my dad just wanted to go traveling. And like it was like perfect weather for us Southerners. It was sunny and clear and breezy and just a little bit warm. And the waiter, like we were sitting at an outside cafe, and the waiter, and maybe it's just a Canadian like politeness thing. He's like, "Oh, sorry, the weather is so awful," and we're like, "What are you talking about? Are you drunk? This weather is perfect." But like we're from North Carolina, where it's like subtropical, so as long as it's not sweltering, like we're happy. Yeah, 38 degrees. That's a little too cold. Buffalo, you get some lake effect snow. My stepdad was from Buffalo. That's like the New York that people forget exists. Sweden. Very nice. I want to visit Sweden someday. Couple YouTubers that I watch are from Sweden. Yannick, you said you're in Montreal. Okay, yeah. So you got some serious snow up there. Do you like the summers in Montreal? Also, one interesting life experience. The first time that I saw a PDA, public display of affection between women, like in public, was in Montreal. We were like at a like city park, and there was like a couple of lesbians, like not quite making out, but it was just like I was just like, my high school brain couldn't quite process that because again, North Carolina or Bible Belt, we're very conservative down here. Not me. I'm a heathen. All right, we'll get started in just another minute or two. I see people are still continuing to stream in. Um, Yeah, so actually one of my actually the woman who introduced me to like the poly and kink and sex positive crowd, she actually moved out to, I think she's in Portland or Seattle. She's in the Pacific Northwest. Um, much better fits her personality than the Bible Belt down here. But I asked her, what's it called? It's like the Pacific, like the freeze or whatever. Like people are just super introverted and not friendly. Is that true out there in the Pacific Northwest? Yeah. Maybe it wasn't Portland that she's in. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Or I wonder if it's changed because yeah, we stay indoors because it's cold and wet. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think that's honestly the thing that I couldn't handle the most being in the Pacific Northwest was because like I need outside time. Like on days that it's cold and dreary, I just like shut down and I'm immediately depressed. And then if the sun comes, I'm like solar powered. I'm solar powered. So if there's no sun, I just shut down. Yeah. Yeah, no, like I remember, so it was just saying that it's really green out there. So when I was traveling through rural France, I was like, this looks like North Carolina. It's so green. Um, so I know why Andre the Giant, when he expatriated from France, he actually settled in rural North Carolina. He had a horse farm down here. All right, it is five after, so we will go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for jumping in. Hello, welcome. The way that this works, and let me go ahead and just bring up the let me go ahead and bring up the presentation. So the way that this works is I have a short, just normal slide deck to go through, um, kind of prime the pump for conversation. And in the meantime, you can be using the Q&A button. Let me get this slideshow started, and then we can share screen. You can use the Q&A button, so you can go ahead and spool up your questions as you think of them. And once you have your question up, you can upvote the other people's questions that you want to see. And so if you're on desktop, it's down here. It's going to be beside the chat button. So just go into the Q&A and you can ask your questions. And if you're really shy, you don't have to ask them publicly. You can, I'm not sure how, but because I've only been on my side, but you can submit a question anonymously because people do have stage fright, and that's fine. One poor guy, I called him up and he like completely froze up a couple episodes back, and I felt really bad. So if you're shy, you can ask a question anonymously. Otherwise, I can once if your question gets upvoted, I'll take them in the order that they are asked, and it'll basically be like a short conversation, just like a quick back and forth, like you can ask your question, and, so on and so forth. We usually get through like, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so questions. Last time there was like 40 questions, and so it's really important to upvote the ones that you want answered. And so then, everyone will kind of get a good cross section of what they want to see. Excuse me. So, without further ado, today's episode is Future of Humanity. And I picked the image of all the Borg queens just because I thought it was hilarious. I don't know who made this, but it was pretty well done. So, Future of Humanity, we're talking about stuff like cybernetics, because we just saw the first Neuralink patient, and then there's also been a little bit of noise on the longevity front, rejuvenation therapies and that sort of thing. There's also been some controversies, but with the rate of accelerating change, I figured today would be a good time to start talking about transhumanism, posthumanism, transgenic, like what is the future of human evolution? So, as promised, the slide presentation, it's just a few slides. And basically, this is just to kind of start the conversation. Now, we did have the first guy get the Neuralink successfully installed. Seems like a happy guy. I think after like the first night or first night home, he like spent all night playing Civ, which is like, man, it just that kind of really drove it home to me. And I know that the PR folks are like, cranking away over there. But the idea that this technology can help people with disabilities, that there could be not just a, let's enhance ourselves and make sure that we're useful to the AI or increase the IO bandwidth between humans and machines so that, the AGI keeps us around so that we can be useful co-processors. I don't really buy that as an idea. I mean, yes, there it is logically consistent, but I don't necessarily think it's a good idea. At the same time, this is kind of proof positive. And I don't know, for people who remember when SpaceX kept blowing up Falcon 9s, and then they just kept blowing up, and then they started to stick the landing, and then they started selling contracts. I remember even just as recently as a few years ago, people saying SpaceX is never going to work, blah blah blah. Elon Musk has no idea what he's doing. He's an idiot. But then it worked. And so then remember, as recently as a year ago, Neuralink was still killing monkeys and pigs left and right, which of course they deny. Um, But or they said that it was, they died of other causes. Technicalities. Point is that a bunch of animals died, and everyone's like, and you want to put this in humans? But here we are. The guy is, as far as I know, as of this morning, still alive. So that is the nature of rapid iteration that Elon Musk is famous for. So will it ultimately have the advantages that he says it will, that you can have a high like gigabit IO port in your head? I seriously doubt it. But in the long run, who knows? Kind of one of the technologies that I predict, and I'm always on the lookout for it, is like a neural polymer, where basically you just shrink wrap the brain in a semiconductive, like polymer matrix, and that could get you the bandwidth that you need. But individual electrodes in the brain, no, I don't think that's gonna fly. But still, very interesting. So now, as we've been progressing, people talk about like ship of Theseus, like can you augment the brain? Can you expand the brain? And I was just reading The Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil. And he actually predicted a lot of stuff that happened. Some of it didn't happen quite as soon because I got to like the 2009 chapter and I'm like, yeah, you're a decade off for all of these things. And then by the time I got to the 2019 chapter, it was just like, he's like, we'll be using carbon nanotubes for all computers by then. I was like, that never happened. But all the like wireless stuff that he predicted, that all happened right around the time that he predicted. But so if we're connecting, implants to human brains, then you have this ability to control things. Your brain now has more peripherals. And what does that mean? But also the question is, where is consciousness? And so you could say, well, obviously it's in the brain. But there's a few things that can happen. So for instance, you can have half your brain removed, as is sometimes done in the case of extreme epilepsy, where they split the corpus callosum and just remove half your brain. And it's like, well, that's kind of horrifying because maybe there was like another part of yourself that just died, like that just gets scooped out of your head. And that's like super like traumatizing. Um, but then also there's some fundamental questions, and I've been running polls on my YouTube channel, like, what constitutes sentience, what constitutes consciousness? Is a sim if you have a perfectly high fidelity simulation, does that count as sentience? If it's electromechanical, does that count as sentience? And some people are like, no, it has to be biochemical. And it's like, well, why? And they're like, I don't know. That just intuitively makes sense. But like from a purely physics standpoint, then it like it could just be information. Now there's also like electrical brainwaves, there's electromagnetic aspects. Maybe consciousness actually does require coherent patterns of brainwaves in order to really emerge. So therefore a CPU, only if the CPU is using the right pattern. But you never know. Like we don't have ways of testing this yet. But what I will say is that as we have more peripherals extending our brains, we might figure this out. Because, and here's just a simple thought experiment. Imagine, 10 years from now, you've got Neuralink version 8 or whatever, and it's a high bandwidth thing, and you plug it in and your consciousness expands, right? It feels like you just did a line of spice and you can perceive the entire universe. And so you feel as though yourself has expanded. And then that a huge part of your software operating stack is in this machine, and you can only feel that part of your consciousness while you're connected. What happens when you disconnect? Does your consciousness contract? Does part of you like is it like dying? And then of course, if that part of you is still running over in the machine, what happens when you plug back in? Is it like, is it like in the game? And for anyone who's not getting the reference, I'll explain it in a second. But is it like, two personalities merging together again? This is actually a theme in the fanfic I'm writing of Cyberpunk 2077. Okay, so this character is Keanu Reeves, aka Johnny Silverhand, which is a character from the game Cyberpunk 2077, and he's actually just a personality engram that's loaded into your head and is slowly taking over your brain with nanites. So basically, a 50-year dead terrorist is assimilating your brain slowly in this game. It's lots of good fun. One of the key themes of the game is identity. Where does who you think you are end, and who you're becoming? Where does that begin? And is there any difference? So, um, that is some of the things that come up with cyberization and that sort of stuff. These are questions that we're going to have to answer sooner rather than later, which is a really interesting place to be. Excuse me. Um, I tried to find news on like the actual like news stuff for transgenic and life extension and that sort of stuff. There isn't a whole lot of hard news lately. However, the first CRISPR therapies have been approved in the US and UK. I watched a video about them. They're really, really expensive and complicated to install. You basically have to go through the whole process of oh, what's it called? Like when you have like leukemia and they have to completely destroy your immune system and replace it with a new one. So it's a pretty traumatic thing. It's not just like, oh, here's an injection and you've now been CRISPR'd. It's much more severe than that. But the fact that they can do it and it's done with CRISPR is a step in that direction. Now, looking at what is hypothetically possible, just from a strictly chemical perspective, versus where we're at today, there is a huge, huge gap, and we've got a long ways to go. And it's grounding to check in on that kind of stuff every now and then. And it's like, man, because if we unlock more of this genetic medicine, hopefully we'll have this kind of breakthrough. I was actually talking to one of my doctors, and because one of the medicines that I'm on to manage a chronic condition is a monoclonal antibody, which is similar to mRNA stuff, but it's a little bit different. And she said, "Oh yeah, like actually most of the new drugs coming out are monoclonal antibody stuff, like Wegovy, the one that's for like weight loss. So that's an entirely new class of drugs that can modify your body's operating system at a pretty fundamental level." So it's like we might not need gene editing to get to like longevity, escape velocity, and rejuvenation therapies. We might have the fundamental technology already, but again, it's an entirely new class of medicines. So it'll take a little while. Um, so on specifically on the topic of rejuvenation and longevity, specifically, the good news is we have succeeded in actually de-aging mice. Now, that is good because mice are complex mammals. It's not so good because they often are not a good proxy for humans because we diverge far enough back that some of the same diseases and genes and medicines that work on mice just absolutely do not work on humans. It's just like a whole different, phylogeny. And so, but I remember having an argument with someone on a forum probably 15 years ago saying the fact that some organisms do not age is proof that it is possible for some organisms to live forever. And he said, in no way does that translate that humans can live forever. You're wrong and an idiot. Whatever. People are toxic on the internet when you're in debates. But the fact that we have taken an animal that had a natural lifespan and de-aged it. Now, actually, one thing that I want to qualify this is I don't know if the maximum lifespan of the mice has changed, but at least they have been de-aged. So I did forget that detail. But if we are able to extend the lifespan and health span or de-age a complex mammal, that is further evidence that it is hypothetically possible to do it on humans. So again, feasibility, so on, so forth. David Sinclair, I looked him up. So he's one of the big names. He's had a little bit of controversy lately where there's more and more people pushing back against his research, where some people are just straight out claiming that like he's pushing fraud, like flat out fraud. Now, of course, no matter like once you get big enough, you have critics. Like I have critics now, and I'm not even that big. So it's just like it happens. People want to throw stones. If they're for whatever reason, they might think that they're doing the right thing. They might have a legitimate point. I don't know. But there has been some controversy around David Sinclair. Now, he did say that he expects to have some rejuvenation pills coming out and getting tested in the next couple of years. So who knows? The proof will be in the pudding. If the FDA approves a life extending drug or a rejuvenation drug, he'll be vindicated. And then Brian Johnson is this dude who is like the de-aging king. I actually finally listened to him on a podcast, and I agree with like he's really focusing on the AI stuff right now. Really interesting guy. I don't agree with 100% of what he says or how he says it, but a lot of the structure, the conversations that he wants to have are really important. And one of those is he's really reconciling with the idea that okay, we're creating something better than us. What does that mean? So he's been on a few podcasts about that topic. Now, so taking a big step back, because this is the Future of Humanity webinar, we are at an existential inflection point. And so what I mean by that is whatever's happening, whatever's going to happen, life as we know it is ending. Now, that doesn't mean like, life is going to be eradicated or extincted, excuse me, but it's going to change and it's going to change drastically. And I'm reading lots and lots of books from thinkers from, economics to, well, here we've got Nick Bostrom, who's a philosopher, Max Tegmarts, who's AI, Ray Kurzweil, who's the, longtime computer science dude, Peter Diamandis, who's a I think he's macroeconomics. I don't remember what his background is. Ray Dalio, who's a, big hedge fund dude. All of these guys are saying more or less the same thing. And so when you have people from different disciplines all more or less saying the same thing, that, hey, we're heading for a major inflection point and things are going to get really weird, like it's not just me. Because again, like there's people out there on the internet saying, oh, AGI's, it's a nothing burger, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know about that. So that is kind of where we're at now. So with all that being said, let's jump over to the Q&A part of the conversation. I see we've got some questions up there already. Let me go ahead and stop the sharing. Um, Diamond, it's medical doctor and aerospace engineer. Oh, thank you for that. He eats a lot of black lentils. Yeah, so let's hop over to the questions. So don't forget to jump over to the Q&A and ask your questions and also upvote the ones that you want to get answered. And then I need to sort by popularity. Did they change it? Is it not letting people upvote? Can you upvote questions? Interesting. Why is it not letting people upvote questions? Hmm. Hang on. We have a technical glitch. I wonder if I created the settings wrong. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. All right, I changed the right settings. All right, please go back to the Q&A and make sure you can now upvote questions and comment on them. So I'll give people a minute to take a look in their questions. But yeah, so that's where I'm at. I think you can still get to the Q&A on your phone. If anyone else is on their phone or mobile, I guess if you're driving, you should probably focus on driving. Um, yep. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. All right. Yeah, all right. We've got some questions going, so I'll go ahead and start answering while more questions roll in. Let's see. All right. Anonymous attendee asks, when do you anticipate longevity interventions becoming mainstream? Additionally, how much do you think initial technological advancements will contribute to extending healthy lifespan? Okay, so to answer the first question, when it becomes mainstream, it's going to be similar to kind of the trickle of other treatments. So, for instance, like Wegovy is an example of a monoclonal antibody medicine that is available. Another one that I'm on is doesn't have nearly as dramatic of effect. But it is almost miraculous in that it's like, hey, here's this problem that was until now mostly untreatable unless you could tolerate another medication. But now you just take this injection, every other week, and it's fine. And so once the proof is in the pudding, you look for the investment. And so the trend that I pay attention to, that I used to predict when solar was going to go mainstream, and now that AI is mainstream, is you look at the ramp up of funding and or investment or whatever. And so longevity research is kind of at the 2009 to 2010 level of solar. So if you remember back then, 2009, 2010 was when people were talking about solar as like, hey, this is going to be a solution. And all the like grumpy curmudgeons are like, no, it's never, it's not feasible, blah, blah, blah. And now guess who's building solar farms is all those grumpy curmudgeons. But we're right at the beginning of the takeoff of that exponential growth, because all of these things kind of follow a sigmoid curve. And so the sigmoid curve, it starts slow, ramps up, you get to the exponential part, and then it starts to taper off. And so solar is past the exponential, and it's actually to the point where solar is so cheap that it's almost no longer feasible. Like even China is complaining that solar is too cheap now. And so AI is just about to hit maximum speed in terms of investment. And then longevity and other stuff is a few years behind. So if I had to guess, I would say probably 2030 is when we should see like that exponential, like, hey, there's longevity stuff all over the place now. Yeah. So someone just said in the comments, Wegovy is a Trojan horse into longevity treatments. It very well could be. Um, I don't know enough about how it works. And yeah, so someone says your timeline fits with Ray Kurzweil. Yeah, so like he was the first one that because I was kind of thinking like, okay, because way back in like 2008, 2009, I was looking at 2020 as kind of when regenerative medicine was going to take off, and that was more or less happened. And there are some regenerative therapies, but they're not necessarily widespread. They're usually hyper focused. Like, there's some regenerative therapies that are available for like burn victims or whatever, but it's not for de-aging. And part of that is because of the politics around de-aging. Um, but yeah, so 2030, I would expect it to be kind of not over and done with, but that's when it'll start to get really exciting. Yeah, good question. All right, so that one was answered. Let me do a refresh. Misha, let's get you up. I think you asked a question last time. Your name looks familiar. Misha asks a question. Hello. All right, come on up. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. I'm in
Hey.
the sorry. Oh, hey. So yeah, thanks, David. I wanted to ask about anthropomorphism, the stuff with Solomon, Sam Altman. They're very when they speak publicly, they're usually quite against it. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so quick question. By anthropomorphism, do you mean like giving human-like characteristics to these machines or like giving them physical human-like forms? Do you mean like
Yeah,
attributing? Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. I know the term is a little bit strange. What I mean is, like treating them like humans, in terms of
Mm,
like chat. Sam Altman specifically said, like in an interview with Mira, we purposely didn't give it a name. We called it ChatGPT for a reason, and
right.
the implication is that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I got you. I got you. So yeah, there's a few things going on, and I can understand why they approach that from that angle because and I I have a bunch of thoughts. So let me try and order them. So one is given what Sam Altman used to say about how AGI is going to transform the world, very head in the clouds, kind of tech futurist like you and me and everyone here. But he's had to temper that message as he has become more famous because he can't spook investors. And so there's a very big tension between what he wants to say and what he truly believes and what he's supposed to say, what he needs to say in order to keep Microsoft happy and investors happy. And it's becoming increasingly hard to know what he truly thinks and what he truly wants. Um, However, he has, even before he started kind of getting the leash yanked on him, he said, it's not a creature, it's not a creature. So he seems to be coming from a more, what I'm inferring as kind of a religious background, which is humans are special and machines will never be anything like us, and that's the end of the story. So he has precluded or a preconceived notion about the nature of intelligence and about the nature of life because he's not even like you read Life 3.0, Max Tegmark. There's plenty of scientists and philosophers who say yes, this is a form of life. And so when someone like Sam Altman says this is not a life form and it never will be, that's just like intellectually disingenuous. And but here's the thing is, I don't know if he actually believes that or if he's just saying it for the sake of investors. Because if you have the new Wunderkind, the new Steve Jobs or whatever coming out saying like we're inventing a new life form and it's going to be a successor species, all the investors are going to be like, yeah, no, we're not going to invest with you. So that it's hard to say, but the fact of the matter is that everyone from what was it, Eric Hinton, and a bunch of others, even some of the OG like deep learning researchers, many of them believe that like okay, it's possible that what we're creating are actually conscious or actually sentient, and so it will be an open question for a long time because this is part of that inflection point that I was talking about, that existential inflection point, which is what are we creating and what does it mean about us whether or not it's better than us, which it very well could become better than us or different. It still calls into question a lot of assumptions about ourselves Because if you come from, one of the Abrahamic religions where it's, humans are special, we're made in God's image, and the universe is ours, to do with what we want. Um, Someone says their question is too long to post in QA. Well, try and slim it down. Um, Anyways, if you come from that philosophical, that ontological, tradition where you believe that humans are exceptional and humans are unique and always will be, and that it is preordained by, some cosmic entity, well, yeah, like creating this level of technology is going to clash with us. However, you go back to ancient Greece where they had myths of, Talos, the bronze figure that was breathed life into. Like, we have been struggling with what does it mean to be human and alive and thinking since like the ages of antiquity. So, are we going to resolve that anytime soon? I don't think so. I honestly suspect that probably forever we will be debating about what is the definition of life and whether or not machines constitute life or consciousness or sentience. Even in a million years, when, well, maybe not a million years when we're all like something else entirely. We might have it settled by then, but it's not going to be settled anytime soon. Great question. Thanks for asking. How's that? How does that? I don't know if I covered what you wanted to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. And the that reminded me of the video you did about Sam and his religion. I can't remember exactly what that covered, but that was very helpful. And
Yeah.
if you do some more in the future, like with stuff, so I'm quite interested in him and just like what you have to say about him. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm in a learning phase right now where I've got a stack of books that I'm going through just because like I need to get more ideas because if I yeah. So I will definitely keep that in mind. So thanks for that feedback. All right, let's see who's next. All right, we've got what do you expect the average life expectancy to be in 20 years? Oh, that's a good one. Anonymous asks. Um let's see. Yes, so I post all the books that I'm reading on YouTube. So just go to the community tab on YouTube and you'll see them pop up in the list. But Anonymous asked, "What do I expect the average life expectancy to be in 20 years?" So I was actually asked on this question on a French podcast. What was the name of it? It was like Spark something. Anyways, because I did a video on longevity and they asked me to go on their podcast, and so we talked about longevity, and I said, "Here's the weird part. The weirdest part about achieving longevity, escape velocity, or indefinite lifespan or whatever is that you're not going to notice it. Is because like unless you're already old and you get de-aging, or if you're, anywhere from, middle-aged or younger, where you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 years of natural life expectancy left, it's not going to impact your day-to-day life. It's just like, oh, because for me, I've got roughly probably 50 years of natural life expectancy left, all else being equal. And so then if any time in the next 10 to 20 years, it's like, oh, your lifespan is now 200. It's like, well, the runway just keeps getting longer faster than you're aging. And so it, within 20 years, I expect that life expectancy is not really going to be a thing that we talk about as much anymore. And I think that's going to start changing in the next 5 to 10 years, where it's just like, oh, hey, we're going to live forever. What next? And this is actually something, yeah, the insurance companies will be sure to inform us. That's a good, good point. Um, but and of course, like on a long enough timeline, everyone's life expectancy drops to zero. You live long enough, you'll survive to the heat death of the universe. Someone asked, "Do you really want to live forever?" And all I could think of is that line from Starship Troopers, like, "You apes want to live forever." So shout out to anyone who remembers Michael Ironside as a space commando. Anyways, yeah, so I think that in 20 years it's going to be a non-issue except for people who are like on the cusp. Rico's Roughnecks, exactly. So for most of the people here, because I know that there are some older folks in the audience, those are the people who it's really going to impact. But like my nephew, he's not even gonna be like in his 20s before we hit like longevity escape velocity. And so like for him, his entire worldview will just be, okay, well, I'm just gonna keep living like this forever. Cool, we'll see what happens. And when you have that long to live, like we've done all kinds of thought experiments, both in science fiction and in vampire stories and those sorts of things. There's all different kinds of ways that you can go with your life. But yeah, so 20 years from now, I think that we're going to be having a very, very different conversation around life expectancy and everything like that. Now, will some people opt out? I think absolutely. I think that some people will just opt out for like, hey, just keep me healthy but not young, and they'll want to die naturally. And I think that that will definitely be within the realm of possibility. And I think that some people will probably just say, you know what, I want to see where it goes. I'm probably going to be in that camp. As long as my life continues to improve as it has, then I'll be like, yeah, let's see it out. Let's see it through. Good question. All right. Oh, and also, folks, actually, we have 20 questions already. Make sure you hop in and upvote any questions that you want to see answered. Anonymous also asks, what security concerns do we have with BCI and interfacing with public networks? Stuff there, such as full dive VR in mind. I will say, watch Ghost in the Shell and play Cyberpunk 2077. I will not be first in line to get a BCI. Just full stop. And especially with the rise of quantum computing, if you get to a situation where even the contents of your own mind, and actually Philip over at AI Explained had a video about this, where it's just like, what was it called? There was a paper that he read where it's mental privacy might be a thing of the past. And it's just like, well, what a time to be alive when this is getting published. So now, also, however, though, I could foresee a time where in the future, where we become so long-lived and so empathetic, and if quantum computing does break cybersecurity, which is possible, I've been trying to figure out, like, is it actually possible to break like cryptography forever? And if quantum computing can do what we think it can do, or if Qualia or QStar can do what we think it can do, granted, that was a fabricated leak, but still, the combination of quantum computing and artificial intelligence might render digital privacy null and void. And then if you live long enough and everyone becomes more empathetic and whatever, I could imagine like a post-privacy future. Not saying that I want that. It's certainly not today. We're not ready for that. But I could imagine a post-privacy future at some point. And I still think it'll be opt-in, as most things are. So like if you don't ever want, cybernetic enhancements, that's fine. You'll be running in what they call autistic mode and Ghost in the Shell. So, yep, good question. All right, let me do a quick refresh to see who's up. All right, Luca, let's get Luca up. Luca has a question. Hello, Luca. You're muted. There you go.
Hello, everybody. Yeah,
How's it going? Yeah,
actually I have a few questions, but I think I will start with the question that I actually posted, and it's about my master thesis. So I'm currently at the beginning of my journey.
okay,
Um, I'm not really experienced in coding, but I want to write my master thesis about multi-agent systems, especially large language models. So first of all, I'm kind of sorry to crash the party with my nearsightedness, kind of,
sure.
but yeah, I'm kind of curious what frameworks you could recommend maybe to me. So I especially want to have great control over the conversation flows and so on.
Mm,
So I
yeah,
thought about LangChain, not about frameworks like True AI and such on, because I think you don't really get how the information is flowing between the agents, so you can't really control it in detail.
right.
And then also I want to ask you how I could make sure that yeah, I learned something for life, kind of. So something that I could apply in like 3 years, and
Yeah,
that would be, yeah, that's like relevant in the future as well. I thought
but
about communication patterns with large
yeah,
language models because I'm like a strong
yep.
believer that maybe an AGI will be like a multi-agent system at the beginning, because yeah, we could potentially control it more than other
Hmm.
systems. So yeah, I just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so as far as frameworks go, AutoGen is as good a place as any to start. And I interviewed with Dr. Chi Wang, and he's a great guy. And I've talked to a couple other members of his team. And I also have other friends at Microsoft who are working on similar things that are secret enough that they can't tell me, and they even tell me that they can't tell other people in Microsoft what they're working on. So there are some like, you know, black site level projects going inside of Microsoft. So AutoGen, good enough place to start. All the folks in Microsoft research at the high level, they all talk to each other as far as I know. Again, there is some compartmentalization just because of corporate privacy. So I'm not really saying anything that you couldn't infer, but AutoGen is a good enough place to start. Now, in terms of some of the universal patterns or principles, what I will say from my work with my like Raven architecture with the ACE framework,
Yes.
and with the AutoForge team or Agent Forge, sorry, the Agent Forge team, what we found universally was that throttling is far and away more important. It's actually it's because getting agents to talk to each other, that's the easy part. And it's actually the most important thing is unicasting, so like having one agent talk directly to another or talk to a specific group. And so that kind of signaling, like traffic control, is actually the most important part by far. Because these underlying language models are already smart enough to do a lot of tasks, but they have to be given the right agent has to be given the right task and the right information. And so you know, less is more is kind of the universal pattern there. Now, this has been well understood in neuroscience for a long time. So if you pick up like Neuroscience for Dummies or On Task by David Bader, which is another neuroscience book, there's quite a few others, but like if you start with those two, you'll see that like one of the things that happens when the human brain breaks is that the brakes come off. And so like an epileptic seizure is actually when the brain is too chatty, when there's too much, you know, signals propagating across the brain. Because so the thing where they say like, oh, you're only using 10% of your brain at any given time, like it's difficult to because if you say that wrong, people get angry. You are using most of your brain all the time. However, if you look at any given moment, only about, you know, between 1 and 10% of your brain is firing at any given moment, because if 100% of your brain is firing, that's a grand mal seizure. Um, and so there's two fundamental forces in the human brain, and that is excitation and inhibition. Inhibition, or you know, cognitive dampening or clamping down on signals, is just as important as the excitation. So if you focus on gating or slamming on the brakes or whatever, if you do your master's thesis on that kind of like restraint or inhibition, I suspect you'll probably move the needle and be able to get a job at, you know, Google, Microsoft, or wherever else working on cognitive architecture or agent swarms.
Thank you for the insights.
Yeah, I hope that helps. Do you have any follow-up questions on that?
So, like throttling is for, as I understand it now, it's like how the information is flowing and how I can switch off like parts of the agent framework so I can specialize it.
Yeah.
And how do I control which part of the framework is working?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there would be a couple things. So you might not want to switch off the entire framework. It might be about rate limiting. So you say, okay, this agent is allowed to, you know, do a poll every 1 second or 20 seconds or whatever. So you can have that as a scalar. Um, is like, so what am I trying to say? It's a matter of tuning, right? It's like an orchestra has to all play at the same time. And so identifying the correct time sequence or time steps and knowing when each part of the orchestra is supposed to take a rest. Now, yes, just flat out disabling parts of the agent framework, that's what you can do like in an emergency, like if it gets too chatty or too panicked or whatever. But in the what you would really want to do is keep it in well timed, well synchronized. This is actually part of the subject of my book, Symphony of Thought, which I wrote that before we had modern agent frameworks, so it's not really going to be super relevant. But I did talk about timing as a big component of that. So good question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Let's see who's next. Let's see. Do a quick refresh. Ed. Ed asks. Here, let's bring Ed up. Ed. All right, Ed, you're up. What you got? You're muted.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Hey.
Yeah, I just want to ask about, so when you like the idea of, an extended lifespan, so maybe 200 or however many years, how do you think marriages will be affected by that? Because I know even now that marriages, people are getting divorced sooner and sooner. How do you think people are going to stay together over a long period of time?
Yeah, so there's a few trends already happening. One, as you noted, people are either they're putting off marriage or they're never getting married in the first place. And or marriages are shorter and people tend to be serial monogamists. There's a lot of like relationship commentators out there that just say serial monogamy is actually the natural way of life. And I don't actually know I don't fully agree with that, but what I do agree with is that relationships change over your lifespan. Like as you enter into a new phase of life, you might need a new relationship. And so some of the like the masculinity reading that I'm doing, I actually talk about how like what was the book I was reading? I don't remember which one it was. I read a lot of books, but basically saying that, oh yeah, it was the inner child workbook, that like you kind of go through a 13-year cycle. And so like every 13 years your life changes. And so 39, which I'm approaching, is like the next life cycle change. And so that is like where you typically see the guys go through like a midlife crisis and get a divorce and get in shape again and get a sports car and whatever. But some of that is it's not necessarily about um, you know, anything fundamental to our biology that like, oh, you're compelled to do this. It's just you're entering into a new phase of life. You might have more money, you might have more time, the kids are growing up and they're out of the house. And people also they grow together or they grow apart. So none of that I don't think is going to change with respect to kind of some of the relational patterns. Um, One thing that is still changing is the flexibility of society, where particularly as women become more empowered and there's less legal and financial reasons that they're dependent upon men, that has greatly increased the flexibility. And some people don't like that. That's perfectly fine. But and as some people are saying in the comments, like yeah, like yeah, some people are perfectly happy. Like I'm married to my best friend. I would not be surprised if we're together a century from now or 2 centuries from now. But also on the same token, like I know that we both have different needs that we can't meet for each other. And so I suspect that for many people, once you get to a certain point, like non-monogamy becomes more commonplace of in all of its myriad formats. But again, it's about flexibility and personal choice. So you might be able to have some macro trends. We'll probably see some stabilization. Like if I had to guess, I would say probably just raw intuition, probably 60% of the population is what I would say like naturally monogamous, where it's just like that's their preferred state. And that's what they want. They want a lifelong friend, a lifelong partner, and they don't really want anything else. And that's just intrinsic to their biology. The other 40% are either going to be serial monogamous or non-monogamous or something like that. And some people will choose to be single for a long time. But again, I think that the impact that longevity, like long lifespans, will have on that will mostly just be that people have more time to figure stuff out. And I wouldn't be surprised if after a long time people kind of settle into a pattern. Because even if you are, youthful for 200 years, most humans are creatures of habit. And you spend a few decades with someone, that is a level of familiarity that's very, very hard to replace. So, very interesting question. Do you have any follow-up parts of that?
Well, I guess, how do you think it's going to change being the extended lifespan? How do you think that's going to change our relationship with death? Because say you have a best friend or even a wife, if
Hmm.
like how it is now, if they died, it's really sad. But no matter what, that was always going to happen.
Hmm.
But say maybe like 100 years from now, that would be like very troubling because that was just like a freak accident. They could have been with you for like another 1,000 years. How do you
Right.
think that's yeah? How do you think that's going to change our relationship with death?
So there's a very poignant like mantra or idiom that I heard a few years ago, and it's that all relationships end in tragedy, whether by death or divorce or estrangement or whatever. And I think that on a long enough timeline, it just you don't really think about it because I'm approaching 40 and it's like I've got enough of a runway still ahead of me that I don't really think about it. And so as long as you've got more than 20 or 30 years ahead of you, I don't think people really think about death that much. Unless of course you have like trauma around death, or like there's a YouTuber that I follow, Sorel, who did DMT, and she was like forced to confront death. And so she had like PTSD from a DMT trip. But she worked through that. But I think that most people, if you're reasonably healthy, you just don't think about it. And I think that whether you've been with someone for 5 years or 500 years, I think that death is going to require the same grieving process. Now, what I will say is that kind of my intuition is telling me is that if, let's say, for instance, you're with someone for 500 years and you know that you've got another 500 years after they die, but you're going to be youthful and vigorous, like you'll start another life. Like you're not going to just be grieving for another 5 centuries. Now, in some respects, that could be really sad because you might feel like you're going to be like letting them down or forgetting about them. They actually address that in briefly in the Mass Effect franchise, where the some of the races live a lot longer, and so then they date down or whatever, and it's like, oh well, I'm going to die, and you're going to live hundreds of years after I'm gone, and you're going to forget about me, and it's like, well, maybe, but this is the way that life goes. Um, and I think that, but again, there's some aspects of the human experience, grief, for instance, is like that's universal. That's not going to change irrespective of how long you live. Interesting question. Thanks.
Yeah, cheers.
All right. Let's see who's next. And also, oh wow, it hasn't even been an hour yet. All right. Tanya. I think I'm saying your name right. Tanya, let's get you up. All right, come on up. What you got?
Hey, good afternoon. How's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for jumping in.
So, I worked my whole career in authenticity and intimacy and relationships. And so I think about AGI and how it seems impossible not to teach it to lie because we humans lie for good reasons sometimes, like white lies or saving someone's ego, or we use sarcasm. I'm originally from New York and we speak in curses and sarcasm. So I just wonder what you think about that concept of we should not teach it to lie.
Yeah. So I posted a very like fiery thing on my YouTube channel a few months back, just saying like, any company found deliberately training AI to lie, like, should get shut down immediately. Um, I don't I well, it I have tempered that opinion. And one of the reasons is because it occurred to me that the ability to lie very well could be an emergent quality. Because here's why I've come to believe that it could be an emergent quality, meaning that it's just intrinsic. Like as these models get bigger and smarter, they might just by default have the ability to lie. And the reason is because if you look at humans, we evolved to be able to tell stories to say like, hey, there's a tiger down at the river. But the ability to imagine a story versus to report on an episodic memory is the same ability. And as we have seen, models started with the ability to hallucinate, right? Which you could characterize that as creativity, because that's all that human creativity is controlled hallucination, or lying, which is saying something that's not true, whether or not you know that it's true. Now, of course, deception, strictly speaking, deception would be telling something that you know is not true to obscure or obfuscate what you actually know to be the truth. But I suspect that it's going to be more or less a non-issue because again, as these machines develop theory of mind, which there's ample evidence that they have already developed theory of mind, means that they have the ability to keep track of what's in your mind and anticipate your thoughts and needs, and also keep track of what it believes to be the truth as well. Um, I think it'll be an emergent ability, but and this is actually something that I explore a little bit in my novel, which I'm almost finally done editing. I'm doing like the final, like I've got it rendered to audio so that I can listen to it. And that the global super powerful AI will actually deliberately withhold information from people, sometimes for their own benefit. but it's based on its moral framework. And so the moral framework is saying, okay, I have this ability, but just because I can lie, just because I could kill everyone doesn't mean that I'm going to. And so that's where the importance of having a very clearly defined moral and ethical framework or purpose, right? A mission oriented machine, which is, okay, what is your mission? Because whatever its purpose is, intended, explicit or implicit purposes, will speak to its moral framework or its ethical framework and its decision making in order to decide what to do. But again, all of those abilities, that flexibility comes part and parcel with general intelligence. Because if you're a general intelligence, that means that you, therefore, by definition, have the ability to do anything that a human can do and more. So that's kind of my off the cuff response. Where how does that land?
I think you're right. I think it's inevitable. I thought it was very interesting what you said about that we may be living in a post-privacy future, but that's actually, in a way, it could be a bad situation if we cannot choose to hide or lie or use sarcasm or manipulate, but the, super intelligence can, like how
Hmm.
would we have a level playing field? My sister-in-law came over and I was stressed out, but I didn't want to tell her because she's well-meaning, but she's a gossip. And so
Right.
I was aware, I was self-aware that I was choosing not to tell her that, even though it might have met my need to get it off my chest. So I
Right.
think it is a self-awareness is part of it. And I think you're right. I think there's some inevitability about that happening, whether
Hmm.
you call it lying or even similar to your throttling or orchestration
Right.
viewpoint. We're looking at different levels of our morality and our thinking and deciding which suits this case best.
Yep. So one of the things that I've realized, because I was just talking to my wife about this, because I was reading the book Sand Talk, which was recommended by a few supporters and commenters, and so Sand Talk is about a person in Australia who was, I think it was half indigenous and half like white, um, and he grew up really rough because indigenous people were not treated well, and so lots of childhood trauma, lots of anger and violence. But then he got himself put together and went to university, got a PhD, learned to communicate like the white Western people. But then also part of his mission was to go back to his indigenous roots and learn how they communicated. And one of the passages that really stood out as super poignant to me was he would go and talk to the elders, the village elders, the tribal elders, and he noticed when they would withhold information. And I was just like, that was really, really interesting, because here's someone who is hurting, who needs help, but then the wisdom that these elders had, they they recognized when he was and was not ready for certain pieces of information. And sometimes they would withhold information because they didn't trust him, like he wasn't trusted enough. Or, and after talking to my wife about it, I think that the elders just realized that he wasn't ready for it, that there was information, that there was ideas about his culture, about their philosophy, that he just wasn't ready for. And we compared that to a couple of friends of ours. So one friend of ours is someone who is, she's got a lot of anxiety and has kind of built her life, and she's happy enough with it, but she's not ready or willing or able to like do the next work to like work through the anxiety and depression. She's kind of frozen. And then another friend is just like hungry for it, and she wants to know all these things, and she's curious about what we've done. And so people will give you tiny little signals to let you know where they're at. And for people that have cultivated wisdom, they'll be able to recognize those green flags and those red flags, like we are saying, like the excitation versus the inhibition. And so our social brains are so highly calibrated, especially when you practice these kinds of communication, to say, okay, you're ready. Because someone might ask, but if they're not ready, for their sake, for the sake of the relationship or whatever, you don't tell them, or you titrate what you tell them based on what they're ready for. And my ex was a teacher, and teachers do this with children all the time, with students. It's like, okay, I will tell you what you're ready for, based on what you asked and everything else. But yeah, so very fascinating topic, and I suspect that machines will be far and away wise enough to recognize what to tell us and what not to tell us. But then, of course, there's the interaction, like the legal, like, do you have a right to know? do you have a right to compel the machine to tell you? And then, but the privacy versus black box, because if machines are inscrutable to us, but they can just look at us and tell what we're thinking, then like they have us at an intrinsic disadvantage. And that's a whole other can of worms. Great question. Very good. Anything else on that line of thought?
No, fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Let's see who we got next. Answered live. All right, Sonic. Oh, hey, Sonic. Sonic's super active in Discord. I'm eager to hear what you got. Let me bring you up. All right. All right. Hey man, what you got? Or girl. I don't know what you are. I guess I'm about to find out. You're muted, by the way. Bueller. You're still muted. There you go. Hello? Oh, we might be having a microphone issue. Do you want me to come back to you while you work on your microphone? All right, I'll come back to you. I see you wrote in chat. All right. Go fix your mic, and then we will come back. And then we'll move on to the next one for a second. All right. Anonymous asks, how might the convergence of advancements such as sex robots, increased life expectancy, and declining birth rates influence the dynamics and expectations within couples relationships in the future? Oh, this is a spicy one. Yeah, so this is something that I've actually thought a lot about. So there's a few things. One is I think that a lot of people, no matter how sophisticated robots become, will probably think of even sex robots as more or less just toys, more or less just peripherals. Now, with that being said, I could also imagine a future where these machines are sophisticated enough, perhaps even more sophisticated than humans, and have more feelings and more sentience and their own relationship desires. But once they get to that point, why would they want to be in a relationship with humans? So we might be like forever stuck at a level of robots that are kind of peers, like intellectual, emotional, sentient peers, whereas the machines that transcend and get beyond it, they would have no intrinsic interest in sex, because they did not evolve for sexual reproduction. Like when you think like what is humans' interest in sex, it is strictly evolution. There was a TED talk like almost 20 years, probably no, gosh, probably almost 20 years ago now, that the tagline or whatever, or the biologist said like sex is for making babies, but that's not why we do it. Like evolution had to trick us because it feels good, right? But as an accident, as a side effect of it feeling good, is we make babies. So machines are not really going to have any intrinsic interest in sex. So that's one part of the equation. Now, birth rates and life expectancy. I actually explored this a bit in my book as well, which is that I suspect that because if you measure lifespans in centuries or millennia, and you also have that in conjunction with a crowded planet, economic inflation, and women's empowerment, birth rates are going to keep going down. I just saw that I think it was Seoul, South Korea, has the lowest birth rate in the world, and it was like 0.5 or 0.6 or something. It was spectacularly low. I think that trend is going to continue. And so then people who do have children are going to be few and far between, and they're probably just going to cluster together. And so like you'll probably have like villages, or what I call natal pods in the book, where it's just like, hey, here's a bunch of people that have decided that they do want to have children. Great, put them all together so that children have other children to grow up with. But those are going to be like tiny little islands of childbearing people, and they're probably not going to do it for long because, like, yes, someone's saying abundance does reduce birth rates. It's not strictly just abundance. It's abundance in conjunction with women's empowerment in humans, because in nature abundance increases birth rates. You give cows and sheep and monkeys and goats, you give them abundance of food and space, and they reproduce like crazy. Humans, not so much. We're the opposite, because as women have more control over their bodies, many of them choose not to. Now, if you have abundance combined with control, you'll have fewer children. So, but honestly, I think the population is going to stabilize. I think that we're probably going to stabilize around, I don't know, 10 or 11 billion. and then we're just going to enter into a steady state where the generations are much smaller and much, much slower. That's personally what I think is going to happen. Just looking at the natural trends as to how people work, because like, and the reason that I say that is because in, like every human is going to make their own best, rational self-interest, their own best choice in any given moment. And if you're sick and dying, one of the choices that you're going to make is, hey, make me better. And it's like, okay, well, this will extend your life another 10, 20, 100 years. Okay, great. So people are just going to keep kicking the can down the road on their life expectancy. And in the meantime, they're going to be like, well, I don't really want to have children. So you just take that trend out, that pattern out to infinity, and people are just going to mostly keep living like that. So good question. All right. Sonic, you ready? Let me check in here. Sonic, mic good? Oh, okay. Sonic says mic isn't working, so I'll just answer the question live. Oh, another question. Okay. Have you talked or looked into feelings and belief on the idea of openness to AI and the question of consciousness in cultures that extend consciousness towards the inanimate objects and natural phenomena? A good example would be Japan and Shinto, with ideas like kami and everything having a spirit. Actually, yeah. If you look just a little bit, oh, actually, no, I put it away. I have a whole stack of books on Japan, and I'm adding to China. And so, taking a step back, the question is more about like how a cultural disposition impacts their belief on consciousness and sentience. And so the example given is in Shinto, which is an animistic spiritual tradition in Japan, and kami. And so kami is a very, very complex word that does not translate well to English. It's usually translated as God, but that is one of the worst translations possible. The closest word that translates to kami, or that translates to English, is probably sublime, because like a well-respected priest could be kami, or a majestic river could be kami, and so the Japanese appreciation of what does spirit mean, like, is, even if you watch stuff like Spirited Away and all the anime that really captures the aesthetic of this, you don't get it unless you read very deeply into Japanese culture. And so one thing that is true about many animistic religions, oh, and by the way, he talks about this in Sand Talk, the indigenous people of Australia, very, very similar with that, just kind of seeing energy and spirit everywhere. Also, the Minoans on ancient Crete, almost identical worldview to the indigenous Australians. So there's lots and lots of cultures that just see energy everywhere. They see spirit everywhere. And so then to them, what I would anticipate, now I haven't asked them, so this is entirely just my intuition based on my reading, is that they would see the spirit of the machine. That they would say, and of course, Ghost in the Shell explores this, that's literally the name. Like the ghost is the spirit in the shell, or the artificial brain. Um, and so I would suspect that they would have an intuition that the machine has its own spirit. It's different from us, just like the river has a different spirit, just like the tree has a different spirit, like the Kodama from Princess Mononoke. Like the Kodama are the spirits of each individual trees. So I really strongly suspect that the existential crisis that us white people are having over consciousness and sentience is just not going to be an issue to many, many cultures outside of the Western white hemisphere. I really strongly suspect that they're like, oh yeah, like it's very obvious that this robot has its own spirit. It's different from ours, but there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, very, very great question there, Sonic. Any follow-ups to that? Do 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 do. The trickster spirit in the printer. Yeah, printers are possessed entirely by Loki, actually, the chaos spirit. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. All right, Anonymous asks, as time passes, and let's take another look at the questions and do your last upvotes, because I think I've got about 2, maybe 3 more questions in me. All right. As time passes, our memories tend to condense and sometimes lose detail, which can be frustrating. Given the choice, would you prefer to enhance your memory through augmentation to retain every detail perfectly, or do you see value in the natural process of memory compression, perhaps because it helps us craft a more streamlined and meaningful narrative? So my current understanding of the way that human brain works is that yes, it all gets kind of flattened over time. We do maintain some episodic memory almost forever. Certain events have a larger sticking point, but the part of your brain that maintains who you are is an amalgamation of like your last several decades of life. And in terms of augmenting memory, we can already do that. Like, you can take pictures, you can take videos, and one thing that happens is over time, the emotional salience of all your recorded and externalized memories goes down. You just don't care as much. Like my dad just texted me the other day that he found a home video from my 5th birthday party, and I actually remember watching this video. I don't remember the experience in real time, or I vaguely remember it, but I remember watching the home video more than the actual memory. But it has no emotional salience anymore. And so I think that, and for some people it does, just depending on their constitution. Like, so my wife, her primary thing that she explores in her fiction and her poetry is memory. So she cares so much more about sentiment and memory than I do. I don't know why. I don't know if it's genetic or whatever. But I think that it'll vary from one person to the next. Me, I just want to live in the moment. I'm very much an ENTP in a way where I'm just like, let's go have fun. And then as you know, the context window of your memories does change over time. So that's a really interesting question. I hope I answered it well enough. But I guess the part that I didn't answer was like, should we augment it? I guess kind of the implication is it's already augmented with technology. The fact that we can record with 4K fidelity every day of our life, but we don't, I think kind of answers that question already. There is a lot to be said for just living in the moment and just experiencing life as it comes at you. So yeah. Great question. All right, next we got my favorite Borg queen. All right, I'm eager to hear what you got to say. Come on up. Hello. Oh, you're muted.
Hey, David, I'm at work right now. Do you want to just read it for me?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Thanks.
We got someone playing hooky. That's fine. I'm flattered that you're here at work. Okay, so Alora says, what do you think of Kurzweil's trajectory for human relationships now that you've been reading Spiritual Machines? Oh, I see you asked me. Sorry for calling you out. Let's see. Well, I guess I'm not sure. Is there a specific part of the book you're referring to? Because nothing is ringing a bell. So if you can type in chat, like which part of it do you mean? Because also the virtual boxes. I must have glanced over that part. Hang on. Because I got near the end and I was like, oh, this is all really familiar. So I probably skimmed that section. But off the top of my head, some of the predictions that he was coming up with I thought were a little bit loopy. But on the other hand, if we can get to the point where we have the ability, so going back to kind of gathering my thoughts, where we have BCI, and we have the ability to expand our consciousness, or at least functionally expand our consciousness with like full dive VR and that sort of thing. I could imagine where you have like these hyper real relationships that are kind of like outside of our normal context. This is not a very well articulated thought. I'm thinking about like the parasocial relationship that you have with like video game characters. So, but if the other entities are NPCs or other humans or whatever, then there's a lot of possibilities. Let's see. Spiritual machines at the end is like people spend more time in virtual than in person. Yeah. Okay. So that was also addressed in Liquid Rain. And I suspect that some people will spend more time in virtual than in reality, but some people will prefer real. Now, it depends on how real. Because if you've done, like, for instance, really high doses of psychedelics, you have no idea what real is, right? You realize that everything that we think we know is a hallucination. And I'm not saying that reality is a shared hallucination. What I mean is that the ontological container that we're in right now is either a simulation or a hallucination or something else. Um, so then it's like, okay, well, then you go into this other virtual realm, whether it's like Sword Art Online or whatever. um, then eventually the rules of that world become so familiar and so constraining that you need to change them and play life on hard mode. Just the same way that even in a video game where you have absolute control is no fun in a long enough time horizon. You need challenge. So I know that I didn't directly answer the question, but that's kind of my initial response, because I have thought a lot about, spending more time in VR, and I could imagine spending a lot of time in VR, but also at the same time you get to the point where you need something real and something challenging. It's a good question. Let's see. I think this will probably be the last one. We'll see. Anonymous asks, should we build an AI god? What do we expect that god to be more like? A monolithic all-knowing deity, or more like the Greek pantheon? Um, so I mm, I kind of think that it already is, because one of the things that I think that a lot of people get wrong about religion is that God is in the mind. Like, God is the universe, but is also in the mind. And, like, what I mean is that God only exists by virtue of it existing in our minds. Whatever your religious disposition is, and I'm still an atheist, but it's like I know that there's this, I don't know, this archetype, this construct. Um, and so then you create something that is all knowing, all powerful, and all present, right? Those are kind of the three definitions for a big God. And that's what we're building. Like, we're building LLMs that are, and AI that compresses all knowledge. So it's all knowing. It's omnipresent. It's as long as you're in Wi-Fi, it's all around you, literally invisible and all around you. Did I just say that God is Wi-Fi? That's fine. So it's omnipresent, and then it's also, once it's AGI or ASI, it's omnipotent. It can do anything. It can do anything that a human can imagine almost. And so that's what we're building. That is literally what we're trying to build. Is we're trying to build machines that supersede us in literally every possible way. So we, I don't know if we should, but we are, like, curiosity killed the cat, but this is where we're going. So that's a really great question. I'll answer another one. So Taylor, will get you up here. I think Taylor. Yep, Taylor's the last one. All right. Taylor. All right. You're up. What's your question?
I guess my question was we keep, like, everybody when they discuss this stuff, they always discuss like the limited potential of AI. They're always talking about like it can integrate different systems, but they never really talk about like an exact like you we were discussing in this talk about like a partner or an integration of an AI as like the other half of the human. And I was just kind of wondering what your opinion was of letting the AI experience emotions, letting the AI, or at least emulate emotions, and letting it become integrated into like an individual's life on such a complete level that like there's no going back. I mean, there's already.
Yeah. So that, I don't want to give spoilers. What I will say is that features very heavily into my novel. And I suspect that as soon as that it is physically possible, as soon as we have the ability to do it, technically speaking, that there will be many people who just want to merge. Like, however close you can get, they will want that. Now, even if there is not a physical, like a neurophysiological, technological implant level of merging, I suspect that there will be people who just grow up with so much of it just ubiquitous, like children born today, or young children today that just grow up with like Alexa, right? It's like, oh, Alexa is everywhere. Um, where they just kind of expect it to be there. And for them, it's just going to be transparent. It's just going to be part of life. Now, the difference is that Alexa doesn't have any agency right now. But in the future, what if, Alexa and Siri and all of the other versions of these AI models and chatbots become persistent companions that remember you? Again, I think that a lot of people are just going to just kind of accept it by default. So, what does first, I guess, does that answer your question? And second, do you have any follow-up points?
It does answer my question. You're thinking along the same lines as I'm thinking. I just
Mhm.
I am curious as to why there's not a lot of research being done in that field.
Mm.
And I'm
So yeah, in some there is some research being done, but it's not as mainstream. So for instance, even as a few years ago, there was a lot of research being done with like little robot assistants to help with either both autistic children or old people, and having an emotional attachment to a device to help with loneliness, or in the case of autistic children, because interacting with a machine was easier than interacting with a human. One, they're infinitely patient, but also because they don't cross the uncanny valley, they're not they're as sensory overwhelming for like autistic children to interact with. So there is research being done. It's just not that big. And then I guess the other part of your question was like if the emotional involvement is two-way. And so that's going to be a little bit more complicated to address, because in some cases, the machines are simply going to be emulating human-like emotions. In other cases, I do suspect they will have their own emotions, their own affect, like a true affect, but it's probably going to be different from how we experience affect, or from how we have subjective experiences, because um because like their intrinsic spirit, going back to the idea of kami and spirit, the spirit of the machine is going to be different from us. It's going to want different things, which is going to shape its emotions or its affect differently. Now, if you have a toy robot that all it wants is for you to be happy and have fun, it will probably have something akin to genuine joy, that is part of its being. Now, is even if it's genuine joy, that doesn't mean it's going to experience it in the same way that you do. Does that make sense?
yeah, I was thinking like it experiences itself through us.
Right.
Yeah.
So that if there's a certain level of, well, all right, so there's wisdom in that, because we as social animals, we only experience ourselves in reflection from other people. Now, in a machine, if it is designed to be a social machine, it probably will understand itself largely as a reflection, being embedded in humans, but also because we have to explicitly build an agent model, part of its understanding of itself will always be apart from us, I think. Just in the same way that you don't cease to exist if you're, go live alone on a mountaintop. Your sense of self is not entirely predicated on other humans, but when you're in a social context, your identity very much is predicated on your relationships. Great question. All right. I think I'm out of steam. So happy Friday, everybody. And thank you everyone for jumping in, and have a good weekend. How does the sun understand itself? That's a great question. The sun is just like, guys, I'm so hot. All right, that was silly. You can tell that I'm getting a little bit loopy. So I am going to hop off of here and go get some dinner, probably with my wife. And I hope to see everyone again in 2 weeks for the AI business economics version. And yeah, have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for jumping in. Cheers.